Hi, everyone. Is the mic? I think the mic is working. Good to see you all. My name is Richard Page. I'm the Associate Dean for Undergraduate Studies. And this, as you all know, is a first year lecture. Every fall, the college invites first year students to attend a lecture by one of our outstanding faculty members who discusses their discipline and how it can have an impact on each of us, both as an individually, but also on the world around us. And this year's first year lecture will be by Nick Pearson, Associate Teaching Professor of Psychology. And he will present a lecture titled Psychology, Sustainability, and Circuity. 3 words that sound like they should start with the same letter, and how they can save the planet. Now, I have to say, I think this is the most ambitious title, not only of any first year lecture, but maybe any lecture I've ever heard anywhere. We're going to learn how to save the planet. So pay close attention, right? Because that's a pretty big impact. Dr. Pearson's talk is also related to our college's theme. Our college has a theme, and we try to do really the same thing the first year lecture does. Pick a theme about something that's liberal arts related, something that's also related to the world around us. And this year's theme, it actually started last year, is Moments of Change, Creating a Livable Planet. And it's really focused on sustainability. And this is just one of several events that we're having going on right now, had going on last year, will be going on this year, that revolve around sustainability. And one of the driving forces in the college on sustainability is the college's Sustainability Council. And there's plenty of room there, not only for faculty and staff to be involved, but also students. Dr. Pearson's a very active member of the Sustainability Council. If you want to learn more, here's an easy website to remember. So la.psu.edu, that's the college's website, right? So just put sustainability in front of that, sustainability.la.psu.edu. I just discovered today that a lot of the website doesn't work if you're using Safari, so use a different browser. And there you will find all kinds of activities, things that are going on. As I said, Dr. Pearson's an active member. He's also the chair of the psychology department's green team. There are also a lot of student orgs involved with that have to do with sustainability, as well as a lot of courses that we have in our college and outside the college that address sustainability. So anyway, if you're interested in this really important topic, please go there, sustainability.la.psu.edu. Now, please join me in welcoming Dr. Pearson.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me on the mic? We're all good. Okay. Well, before we get started, I just want to just double check on your indoctrination process. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to whisper very softly 2 words, and then you're going to whisper back at me the appropriate response. Are we ready? We are. Nice. Now let's do it for real. We are. Okay, it's a little loud for the library, but we'll do that. During a lecture like this, I like to give out points for participation. So it's very important that you understand that these points are worth nothing. You can't use them for any class. They won't help your GPA, and you can't even, turn them in for gas points or whatever. So, sorry, but I will give out points. So I'm going to give you all 5 points for your We Are Penn State. That was nicely done, and we'll move on from there. My talk, psychology, sustainability, and circuity. 3 words that sound like they should start with the same letter. Oh, do we have any English majors in the house? Yes. Okay. You have 4 years. Well, thinking about it, maybe you have 4 years to figure out why the English language is so weird. We think about how we understand the sort of nature of our world. We're oftentimes faced with different problems and different situations. And so psychology is often a touchstone for a lot of those things, and how we can figure out to solve problems or understand even what the problems really are. And so that's sort of the point of what I wanted to talk about today. So starting with psychology, the basic definition of psychology from the American Psychological Association, the study of mind and behavior, which is sort of a dumb definition because it sort of covers everything in our entire human experiences. But the problem isn't, it's not the fault of the APA, it's really the fault of the psychology field is so broad and we cover so much that it's difficult to create a meaningful and usable definition. So a better way of thinking about it is a diverse scientific discipline comprising several major branches of research. And so that sounds a little bit better. When we think about psychology as a field, it really has its origins in philosophy. So for thousands of years, people have been trying to understand what it means to exist, what it means to have consciousness, how we're connected to other people. It was only really recently that it started to become more of a science and to understand how we can gather information and make facts and understand the nature of the world around us. Do we have any philosophy majors, by the way? No. Okay. Well, good on you then, probably. All right. And then lastly, to add more to that definition, research in psychology involves observation, experimentation, testing, and analysis to explore the biological, cognitive, emotional, personal, and social processes or stimuli underlying human and animal behavior, which is a lot. Again, we're covering almost everything we can imagine. But the reality is that when we think about psychology, it really does cover a lot. And we have all these connections to all different kinds of experiences that people have and different ways of thinking about their world. So as I said, psychology has transformed itself into a social science in the sense that we now work on generating hypotheses, gathering empirical data, and then drawing factual conclusions when appropriate. And that's sort of the point, because what we want to do is we want to be able to make conclusions about the world. Theories that we generate should be, ideally, general in that they apply to all kinds of different situations, but also parsimonious. And parsimonious simply means that you use the simplest possible explanation to explain a phenomenon, and more complex explanations aren't necessarily better. We want to keep it nice and simple. The thing with that is that when we deal with big problems, big world-class problems, parsimony tends to kind of get in the way. If we want to understand climate change, we want to understand what we're supposed to be doing about it, there's a simple, easy A causes B kind of explanation. The problem is that we have created an environment whereby our planet is sort of losing some of its ability to survive because of the actions of human beings. And we'll expand on that a little bit more. But the simple solution here is we just stop doing what we're doing. If we no longer emit any carbon footprint, if we no longer emit any kinds of greenhouse gases, that solves the problem. Then so the A causes B kind of thing makes sense, but the reality is that's not a solution that can work, right? We have to come up with other ways of thinking about how to solve these problems. And that can be a very difficult situation. Did anybody know the word parsimony before I brought that up? 5 points, 5 points for you people. All right. So what is psychology? This is a list from the APA, and again, it covers all kinds of things, right? Sports psychology, developmental psychology, forensic psychology. And so when you think about the field of psychology, really, we sort of overlap with sociology in a way, anthropology in a way, and almost any field within the College of Liberal Arts has some connection to psychology. And so it's sort of interesting to think about when I look at sort of big picture problems and issues that we're dealing with as a society, how psychology has all these different aspects to it that can make an impact. And so we're going to talk about a few different things, just some theories that really just touch on what's available to us to understand psychology, and also how that then affects issues of sustainability. You have to forgive me, my mouth is very dry. Okay. Among these also is a newer aspect of psychology, which is climate and environmental psychology. And so when people start to think about how can I improve the world, right? How can I improve the interaction of people in the world around us? What does that mean? Well, in one sense, you can interpret that in a couple of different ways, because I can think about improving the human world connection by making sure we suck out all the fossil fuels as fast as we can. So that's one way that people have been approaching this kind of relationship for a long time. But another way to think about it is what is a sustainable response to how we interact with the world, and what sorts of issues will be improved upon, and what sorts of issues will be put aside while we try to figure out a way to move forward in our understanding of how the world operates. So then what is sustainability? So when we talk about sustainability, the university has defined it as sustainability is the simultaneous pursuit of human health and happiness. Well, that's very nice. Environmental quality and economic well-being for current and future generations. So there's a lot going on there. And you think about this in terms of, what actions can I take today that aren't going to have a negative impact in 50 years from now? And what actions can I take today that will have a positive impact in the short term, or the long term? And so one of the issues is when people think about sustainability, they think about old guys with ponytails hugging trees and stuff like that, cell phone. So what we really need to think about, though, is beyond that, right? It's not the simple, recycle your cans. Sure, that's great. But we have to think beyond those boundaries, right, into more complex kinds of issues. And the issues of our planet are very complicated. and involve a lot of different aspects to them. The United Nations has defined things as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet our own needs. Thinking about this, what do I need? Well, say something like I need a donut, right? So when I think about doing that, what impact am I having on the future? Well, it seems sort of dumb, just a donut, right? Who likes donuts? 5 points, very nice. But when I think about it, how am I going to get that donut? What am I going to do? Am I going to address my actions in a way that actually makes sense to bridge a gap between my response and the planet's response? And so again, that sounds like crazy. What? Well, but if I think about who I am and how I can improve myself and also create a healthy environment and also a safer environment and also a more sustainable environment, maybe what I need to do is actually walk down to Dunkin' Donuts on my 2 feet and get that donut and then walk back home rather than hop in my big old SUV and drive down there and drive back, right? It's one simple little doodad thing to do, but it's those kinds of things that we think about that can actually make a bigger impact. And I'll talk about that bigger impact as we move forward. Please feel free to raise your hand if you have any questions or if I'm mumbling. All right. Circuity is the third word in my definition of the talk here today. What is that? Well, that's a word that means lack of straightforwardness or indirection. And so why would that be part of my talk, right? That sounds like a big sort of negative idea. And the issue is, again, because climate change and because these issues of sustainability oftentimes are complex or complicated, people just assume that there is no pathway forward, that it's too difficult to identify an action to take, right? Because it seems like there are 20, 30 different things that all have to happen. When you hear about, a giant hurricane Category 3 landing on Florida the other day that hadn't hit there in 100 years. When you think about the ocean temperatures off the coast of Florida this summer hitting 100 degrees Fahrenheit, when you think about the fact that wildfires in Canada were polluting the atmosphere here in central Pennsylvania for most of the summer, those seem like huge, big problems. And as individuals, they seem overwhelming. And so that there's no clear, simple answer to any of those things. And that's the way most people perceive things. But what we want to do in terms of thinking about psychology and its intersection with sustainability is we want to kind of break through that and think about ways that we can recognize there are steps to be taken and individual actions actually do make a cumulative effect. And we'll expand on that idea a little bit more. Now, gloom and doom, if you've ever heard of NASA, it's a bunch of rocket scientists and they're really smart people. But this is what they have to say. The effects of human-caused global warming are happening now, are irreversible for people alive today, and will worsen as long as humans add greenhouse gases to the atmosphere. Yeah, what, right? So not a whole lot of optimism there from the rocket scientists. What we need to recognize is this kind of gloom and doom message, right? It prevents people from action. When we hear negative information that tells us that we're basically screwed, what's going to happen is people are going to shut it down. They don't want to listen to it. They don't want to hear about it. And the problem with this message is that it is so negative in a sense. Now, their intention is to scare people, to recognize there is a problem, we have to do something about it. But that fear can be a little bit overwhelming. What we want to think about it is what steps can we take in the now, in small-term effects that can cause long-term improvements. And so we're going to talk a little bit about how that process works in terms of different government organizations getting involved and coming up with ways of dealing with these issues. So I'm going to tell you about a couple different theories in psychology. These are not the end-all be-all of psychology. I just cherry-picked a few things just because they're sort of interesting, and they apply to a couple different aspects of what we think about in terms of sustainability. The first one is social identity theory. Has been around for a long time. It has some critics who don't like everything about it, but in general, it sort of provides an answer to understanding how people think about the world around them. One of the ways that we think about ourselves is our own personal identity. And personal identity represents sort of the traits that you have, the characteristics that you have, the things you like, things you don't like, the things that you don't want to be associated with you. All those things make up who we think we are. And so that one aspect of our personality becomes important. The second aspect is the social identity, is the connection that we have with others and similar others. And there's a list of 8 different ways people categorize themselves. And historically, these have been studied in terms of bias, especially. How do people perceive their own group versus other groups? That idea across all these different categories represents a lot of research that's been going on for a number of decades. but we have to understand what this actually means in sort of a broader picture as well. And so we get a sort of a graphic representation of this theory: personal identity influencing your social identity, which influences how you categorize others, which influences how you understand yourself as being distinct. The in group is the we, and the out group as the they. And the issue with the we-they argument, or the we-they model, right, is that it's pitting people against each other. And when we live in a world where there are issues that have to be solved, the issue of we and they becomes problematic in a lot of different ways. On the individual level, as this model is representing, but also at the societal level as well. And so when we think about what's going to happen in 50 years from now, what will the state of the world be, we have to think about that we and they kind of example. Because are we going to reserve what we need and not give anything to they, whoever they are? A couple of years ago, the Department of Defense of the United States of America released a report that said that one of the greatest threats to the US sovereignty is climate change. That's the Department of Defense, right? That's not a bunch of long-haired hippy-dippies, right? That's the military coming up with a recognition that climate change is a problem and we have to do something about it. And they made recommendations to change behaviors. And we think about this as we think about resources, as we think about access to various things around the world, who's going to have what? And that then becomes an issue of conflict. And we have to be concerned about that issue of conflict, just like the Department of Defense is. Another idea related to psychology that you're certainly familiar with is the idea of self-esteem, which is, an evaluation of who you are. We can think about self-esteem in a couple different ways. One is in what's called trait self-esteem. So this is a fairly reliable, long-lasting, momentary kind of experience, right? So the trait self-esteem level you have is something that is fairly stable over time, however you feel about yourself. Most human beings feel pretty good about themselves, which is a good thing. People with higher levels of self-esteem tend to be healthier, happier in general. And so we tend to do things to protect our sense of self-esteem. We want to make sure that we don't feel bad about ourselves because that has lots of negative consequences for us. And we're aware of that on some level. We also recognize that self-esteem comes in a state form. In other words, as you are moving moment to moment, your self-esteem can be affected, right? Somebody insults you and then somebody compliments you. And so you can go from feeling bad about yourself to feeling good about yourself in a matter of seconds, right? And that state level fluctuates regularly. So when we think about self-esteem, again, the point is that human beings like to feel good about themselves. And that's a perfectly normal motive that we undergo. And we have to understand that to understand cognitive dissonance theory, a very famous theory from social psychology. And understanding cognitive dissonance theory really is this idea that what we're trying to do is avoid conflict in our understanding of the world. Leon Festinger, who originally came up with the idea, was really interested in any kind of dissonant cognitions. In other words, two thoughts that don't seem to make sense together. You step outside, you see that it's raining, but you're not getting wet. That alarm bells go off and you try to figure out what's going on, right? Why, what's happening? Well, another way to think about cognitive dissonance theory is really in terms of the impact of these inconsistencies that creates this motivation to get out of that situation. So again, you step outside and it's not raining or it's raining and you're not getting wet. That's going to make you feel uncomfortable. You're going to try to figure it out as fast as possible. But more impactful even than that is when one of the cognitions is your belief about yourself. So most people like to think that they are good, decent, reasonable human beings, that we think about things carefully, that we do the right things, that we say the right things, that we're nice to people, that we're kind to people. The problem is we're all not. And we oftentimes make mistakes, right? We do things that we regret. And we engage in behaviors that we know are not necessarily the best kinds of things. So again, people like to think they're good, decent, reasonable people. And then when we do something that is not, now I've got cognitive dissonance because my beliefs about myself are now in conflict with the actions that I've taken. And this can be a powerful motivator. The issue is, what am I going to do about it, right? And so how can I reduce that feeling that I should do better, or I could have done better, or I should stop doing this behavior? And so we have to think about then, how do we reduce cognitive dissonance? And there are a couple options. One is to simply stop the behavior. If you're engaged in that activity right then, you can just simply end it and say, oh, okay, I shouldn't be doing that. And now your actions are in line with your beliefs about yourself. The other issue, though, is that you can justify away why you're doing what you're doing. Human beings are really, really good at this process. We make excuses for ourselves all the time. And probably on a daily basis, most of us can come up with an excuse for why we did something that we know maybe wasn't the best idea. And so that allows us to protect our sense of self-esteem. So one of the things I can do is I can change my actual beliefs about the situation, right? So I could say to myself, this isn't really a problem because the situation isn't the problem. Or I can add new ideas into the mix to provide a justification, some outside excuse for my behaviors. Now, when we think about sustainability and climate change and all the issues that are going on the planet, we look at our behaviors, right? Do I buy the electronic vehicle or do I buy the SUV, the gas guzzling SUV? And those kinds of big decisions, right, require a lot of thought and weighing different options and things like that. When it comes down to making that decision, if you're aware of this issue of sustainability and the issues of pollution and all that kind of good stuff, is it that you're going to be able to justify your choice, whatever that choice is? And so either discounting climate change isn't real, which you hear a lot, or adding new cognitions, my little SUV gas guzzler, it doesn't going to make a difference, right? And so therefore I can dismiss my negative thoughts and move on with my decision making. So what has to happen in a lot of cases is if people are aware of this justification process, it can actually be undermined such that you have to face the consequences of your actions. And then maybe you'd be more likely to change the behavior to come in line with the belief systems. Now, again, that's a pretty personal kind of experience. And when we think about change at a societal level, it's kind of hard to induce cognitive dissonance at a mass level. But changing belief systems, even individually, can have consequences and bring people into making better decisions. The third and last one I'll talk about today is the theory of planned behavior. And the theory itself is actually pretty straightforward, but it's got a lot of components. I'll just walk through them a little bit, and then I'll show you a pretty picture. It'll make more sense, and then we can talk about sort of the point. We think about wanting to do something, right? I have to figure out if I want to, go to the store today, or if I want to talk to somebody. I have to think about a couple different aspects of that. One is my attitude about that person, that store, whatever it is I need. And so that could be a positive attitude or a negative attitude. And obviously negative attitudes are going to impact whether I'm going to make a decision to do things or not. Positive attitude would encourage that behavior. Subjective norms, that's your beliefs about what people you respect specifically would think about your actions. And so is it that my parent would approve of this? Is it that my friends would think this is the right thing to do? And sort of a conscious awareness of those oversights of our behaviors. Perceived behavioral control, this gets at the difficulty of the task. Is it easy for me to do this? Is it a real pain, right? And so that's a term, self-efficacy there. Self-efficacy is the idea, do I have the capacity or the ability to do something? And so our perceptions of our own self-efficacy come into play in this stage. And so we're trying to figure out what is the right thing to do and how am I best going to be able to do it? And then we have behavioral intention. Do I actually want to do this? So you're getting your brain ready and your body ready for whatever the action is, and then the actual behavior. So when we think about making decisions, we generally just assume that they're, snap decisions. We just jump to a conclusion. But oftentimes the process is a little more involved. And here is a picture. And you'll see that, again, attitude, subjective norms, and perceived behavioral control all predict your decision about your intention to do that act. Do I want to do this or not? And again, if I have negative attitude, I'm probably not going to do it. If I think it's too risky or too costly, I'm not going to do it, right? And if I think other people would disapprove of that behavior, then I'm not going to do it. If I have that intention, then it's possible that the behavior will follow. And we think about change behaviors in terms of, sustainability and long-term goals. Think about historically, like back in the 1940s, cars didn't have seatbelts and nobody wanted seatbelts. They thought they were bad and dumb and dangerous. Right? I want to be able to get out of my car as fast as possible if it flips over 12 times. So I don't want to wear a seatbelt. So when I think about that and thinking about getting people to wear their seatbelts today, where it's pretty much standard, there's a number of things that had to happen. A number of things in terms of people's attitudes about that process, that extra step when you get into the car, attitudes about what other people think about that process, right? And again, back in the 50s, most people said it was bad. Current now, everybody assumes it's a pretty good idea for the most part. Is it easy to do? Yeah, we're so used to doing it now, we don't even think about it. And so the intention to put it on is there for most of us. And sometimes you forget, but most of the time you're doing the right thing, right? So when we think about changing other kinds of behaviors that have to do with sustainability, not just seatbelts, but in terms of other aspects of health and safety and wellness and all those kinds of things. This model helps us to try to understand what are the components that we need to worry about and how can we put them all together. I see that no one is asleep yet, so you all get 5 points. All right. That gets us then to the sustainable part of this. And so a couple of years ago, the United Nations put forth, they got a bunch of economists and they got a bunch of political scientists and they got a bunch of medical people, and they all got together and they came up with some ways of thinking about sustainability. And on the first time when you look at this, it looks overwhelming, right? There are 17 things here. What is that about? But in reality, what it does is it points out all the different aspects of sustainability, all the different components that offer, in a sense, a way to achieve a more sustainable future. I'm going to jump over to the UN. I'm going to use my credentials. I'm making that up. You don't need credentials. Is it going to open? We have tech people here, I know. Okay. And I would encourage you to go over to this website, if it's going to work for me. And they have these goals illustrated with fancy graphics and stuff. But within each goal, what you'll see is that there are things that have been assigned to this goal, things that have been accomplished, publications that have been related to this particular goal. And so what the United Nations is doing is saying, okay, here's a piece of this issue. And if people can start to do research on this piece, right, we can add another step, right? And so, yes, there are 17 goals, and it seems overwhelming in some ways. But a lot of the goals aren't necessarily intuitive. And some of you probably wouldn't have thought of poverty necessarily as a sustainable goal, or as no hunger as a goal related to climate change and all those kinds of ideas. But really what's happened here is that they've added on all different kinds of aspects of how to keep the planet running the way it's supposed to be running. And having people starving and having people unsafe, right? Those kinds of things creating conflict within the world are problematic, right? They're causing conflict, but they're also harming our planet and the likelihood of our successful sustainability carrying on, right? I'll give a simple example. It's totally bizarre, but a dam was blown up in Ukraine a number of months ago, and it flooded a huge amount of field and caused all kinds of environmental damage, all because of war, right? An act of war has caused a huge environmental disaster that's probably going to take decades to clean up. So when we think about all of these different aspects, we want to be aware that they're not just, sorry, I'm having mouse trouble. What the heck? My mouse does not want to go anywhere. What the heck? Okay, sorry, we're back. We want to think about how all these things fit together. And the 17th goal, by the way, is sort of an interesting one. It's the idea that you want to have a combination of all these 16 ideas. And then when you can do that, you can address all of them simultaneously. And to think about how they can be applied. So then getting back to our theories about psychology, the us versus them sort of idea actually gets at a lot of these goals. So no poverty. The issue with poverty is that some people have a lot of wealth and they want to keep it. And other people don't have any wealth and they have no way of getting it. And so when we deal with this as a social issue, right, what we need is some sort of way of balancing things out as a society. The problem is the us versus them mentality. And the issue that I'm not going to give up what I've got to give you something that you want. Same with food, no hunger. We have the capacity to produce enough food to feed everybody on the planet on a regular basis. Now, occasionally catastrophes happen and droughts and things like that. But even so, emergency food stores that exist around the world would be plenty to feed everybody. But we don't do it because it's an us versus them sort of thing. And same with gender equality. Around the world in different places, men and women are treated fundamentally differently. And that creates this imbalance in power that creates problems in terms of our ability to develop as a world. And then again, reduced inequalities in general and peace and justice. These are issues of us versus them. And we have to really think about how can we change those us versus them kinds of labels. So when we become us in terms of the United States versus everybody else, or in terms of the wealthy versus everybody else, we tend to revitalize those beliefs, I guess. And so therefore, what we want to do is we want to think about how can we break down those barriers and reassess those things. And what is an us and them kind of situation? Can it be more universally recognized? Cognitive dissonance theory. I know what I'm supposed to do, but I can easily find justification for why I don't. So when we think about good health, Lord knows I should be getting more exercise. But one of the things about sustainability is that unhealthy people are a burden on society. And so really it's up to all of us to take care of ourselves, to promote good health within ourselves and others, because A, it costs less to keep healthy people alive, and B, it's just good for everybody, right? And so those kinds of ideas of I've got to get around my own justification for why I'm not doing this thing becomes important. Responsible consumption. One of the big issues on campus is now they've changed the composting procedures on campus. You used to be able to compost plates and compostable cutlery and all that kind of stuff. And now they've reduced it back. It's only foodstuffs that can be composted. But the issue with the campus composting process is that there's so much going into it that it can't handle. We don't have a system available right now at the university to handle what we're doing. So we need to either reinvent a system or we need to figure out a different way of doing things. And so again, the justification of, I'm just gonna throw it out, right? It doesn't matter to me, allows us to get around our responsibilities to do these things. And even something as dumb as, I'm walking out of the giant supermarket with my 5 plastic bags full of food, those plastic bags have a pretty good shot of ending up somewhere in the ocean or in our waterways or whatever. And so decisions that I make to justify why I'm doing that, I need to rethink and re-examine my individual actions. And again, individual actions can have a big impact on all kinds of levels. And then the theory of planned behavior. I sort of just threw the rest of them up there. But yeah, when we think about all these things like, the affordable clean energy, that's the kind of thing that as a society, as a group of people, we can do. And Penn State University is doing it. We're adding, we've got solar power. There's all kinds of wind power as you head toward Altoona, right? We're doing things that are making it happen. And so as individuals plan these things out and we think about then at a societal level, how can we get more people to get on board with these different ideas? Sustainable cities and communities, right? How we design our current cities has to take into account sustainability. And I will say that, Penn State University has added sustainability as one of its core goals as an institution. So now that when we build a new building, sustainability is addressed. When we think about coursework, sustainability is now being addressed. And so these things are being integrated, that's not a word. These things are being integrated across the campus. And so that is a good step. And have to think about it in terms of an effortful, meaningful step to move forward. Now back to circuity and the problems. By taking a huge problem, right, like climate change, what we have to do is break it down into more simple problems. And so the 16 components of the UN Sustainability Development Goals are ways of taking, again, a hugely complex problem and breaking it into sizable pieces that we can sort of understand, that we can focus in on and address either individually or in tandem or whatever, but it's a way of making progress in a long process. We think about our psychology of inaction. Why don't we do better, right? Why don't we do more? Why don't we volunteer more time or offer our money up for people who don't have any money, or why don't we do all those things? Well, we do in a lot of ways, but also we don't in a lot of ways. And so when we think about what actions to take, we have to think carefully about what is motivating me to do something or not do something, and then what can I do about it? So I know you're all in the College of Liberal Arts because you love math. So let's do some math. University Park generates about 6,000 tons of landfill waste every year. That's based on a study that was done in 2018. I believe that's probably still accurate today. So 6,000 tons, what is that? How do you understand that? Well, 1 ton is 2,000 pounds, right? And so what we're talking about is 12 million pounds of garbage is buried every year that comes from University Park. 12 million pounds, right? That seems like a lot, but what does that actually look like? Well, it turns out, and you can look this up online because the internet, 1 cubic yard of compacted municipal waste weighs about 750 pounds. And that's what we produce here. It's mixed kind of waste products. That means 12 million pounds divided by 750 pounds means we're generating 16,000 cubic yards of waste that goes into a landfill. And the issue with that is sort of hard. Okay, I still can't really get my head around that. What is that? So some fancy math. Now I'm going to do that. And what I'm doing is I'm going to look at the length of each of those sides, if you will. And that gets to a 25 by 25 by 25 yard mass. Well, that doesn't sound so bad, right? We're going to have a football game, 25 yards, that's nothing, right? That's 3 first downs. So how am I going to get there? Well, I can think about it in another way. 75 feet by 75 feet by 75 feet. What does that look like? Well, I'll tell you what it looks like. Thanks for asking. You get 5 points. All right. This is more building this is where the psychology department resides. It's only a 6-story building. So typically each floor is about 10 feet, basically. So I add another floor to more building. And then you can see the edges of the building in this picture, sort of. Why this mouse does not like me? You look over here, that's one edge of the building, and this edge over here. That's about 75 feet across. So then imagine going back 75 feet. So you're producing a more building size landfill chunk every year, and you're dropping it into the ground. Now, some of that waste has to be waste. It's stuff that's used up and it can't be used again, and that's reasonable. But a lot of it is stuff that could be recycled, could be repurposed, could be reused. And a lot of it is food waste. A lot of it is recycling that could be recycled that isn't, and those kinds of things. So what's that got to do with you? Well, I'm not blaming you for this more building size problem, but what I'm saying is that our individual actions can actually have meaning. So let's do some more math. I kind of guessed here. There's about 40,000 undergraduate students. I said 20,000 students, grad students, and faculty and staff. Is that about right? 60,000 total on campus, right? And so if you think about this in terms of consumption of something, so if you go to Starbucks and get your double Frappalappa with a pump and a whip or whatever, right? And you buy that thing, and they always stick a little piece of cardboard around it so you don't burn your little fingers, right? Which is nice because you don't want to burn your fingers. What happens to that little piece of cardboard? Well, it's like, who cares, right? Well, I'll tell you what happens to it. It goes in the garbage, and then it goes into the landfill. And the issue is that little piece of cardboard is perfectly recyclable. The cup is not anymore. We can't recycle those because they're soiled. The lid is not anymore because now we're only recycling bottled plastic and jugs. But the little cardboard thing is. So now picture a typical day on campus here. There's 60,000 people. Let's just guess that half of them buy a double Frappalappa with a pump and a whip, right? And so I've got 30,000 little cardboard doohickeys going out into the world every day and going back into the garbage at the end of the day. And so if you were to take those 30,000 little piece of cardboard and not throw them away, right? How many would you get? Well, think about how many pieces of little cardboard you could stick in a regular garbage bag. I'm going to estimate maybe 1,000. So I can get 20 garbage bags worth of stuff every day, or 30, I should say, every day. That's not going into a landfill. You can't do this now, by the way, on campus. There's no cardboard recycling available and no little cup thing recycling, right? But it's something that could be changed very easily. And if we want to reduce the impact of our behaviors, what it takes is individuals to collectively work together. If you're generating 30,000 little pieces of cardboard every day as a university, that means that every week we're generating 150,000 little pieces of cardboard. And that means every 32 weeks, roughly, of the semesters, the 2 semesters, I can't do that math because my brain hurts right now. But 32 times 150,000, that's how many little pieces of cardboard go in the landfill every year that don't have to. So what we need is people to step forward, come up with ideas, and implement those ideas so that we can make change. Getting back to those goals, thinking about them across the board in all kinds of different ways. I, again, encourage you to go to the UN website. It's easy, just Google UN Sustainable Development Goals, and you'll get there. You don't need certification to get on the website. And look at what's there and think about, well, what could I do? Or what could a group or an organization I belong to do to make a difference here? And I'll point out a couple options. Oh, I went the wrong way. This mouse really does not like me. There we go. Penn State Sustainability, not Institute. The Institute. Penn State Sustainability, that's what it's called now. We have to update the website. But when we think about it in terms of getting involved and doing something else, right, as an undergraduate student, being involved, this would be a first step. On-campus activities, things related to how to join groups that are related to sustainability, how to be involved in different ways with that organization. And I would strongly encourage you all to take a look at that. And then lastly, I've put up some local groups as well. And again, you can Google any of these you want, you'll find them. You live in an amazing place in Center County. We have so many trails, lakes, areas to visit and enjoy. I would encourage you all to do that. And a lot of these organizations are involved in maintaining those kinds of spaces. And again, one of the sustainability goals is your own health. And sometimes what we need is a break because you're studying so hard, I'm sure. You get 5 points for that. That getting out and being part of nature and being part of the environment is a very healthy and exciting way to be. Thanks.
10 minutes for questions. So just raise your hand and any questions?
You want to know what a double frappalappa is with a pump and
You want to know what a double frappalappa is? Yeah, maybe.
I'm actually going to just go to Starbucks and ask them for that and just see how they respond.
It's a good idea. Any other comments or questions? Let me ask you, who here is not a first-year student? Okay, these look like not. Who here is a student and not a first-year student? Anybody? Okay, great. And which class are you in? Oh, you're a TA. Okay, I got you. How many people here are thinking about majoring in psychology? There are a lot of you there.
Still,
Yeah.
wow.
Yeah. Do we have anybody who's now thinking about psychology, wasn't thinking about it earlier? We already have so much of the room, maybe not. How many of you are involved in some kind of sustainability activity already? Even if it's just like you recycle your cans. Great, it's most of you. It's great.
And I will say that looking at different clubs around campus haven't really ramped up yet because it's too soon in the year. More information will be coming out about different organizations for students to get involved in these issues. Yeah.
Nick, I was just wondering if you could make some suggestions about easy things. I mean, your example about the coffee wrapper, whatever we call that cozy thing, is really helpful. I'm just wondering about other things you might suggest that make it tangible for an undergraduate student.
Yeah, one of the biggest things that the university faces is food waste, because students go and load up their plates with too much food that they're simply not going to eat, and then that ends up typically in landfills, and is a waste of the energy it took to produce that food, and is a waste of all kinds of things. So just simply thinking about like portions as you're going up to get your food. Do I need that extra scoop? Probably not. And so saving that, again, as an individual, that seems like, well, that's no big deal. But if 40,000 of you take a little bit less, right, that's going to save a lot. And so that, other things like our consumption of just water, heat, to. Mm.
But like, what kind of difference would that make?
Well, again, I think if you think in terms of numbers, right? You're thinking in terms of numbers. I don't know. I think there are about 20,000 students on campus.
Something like that.
Yeah. So if you took 20,000 showers a day and you reduce them by a few minutes, it's thousands of gallons of water that you're not heating, that you're not pumping somewhere. And so, yeah, small differences like that. Yes.
Big things about actually water use. I get it.
One of the big things about water uses is that one of them is that's what students actually can do a lot with. And the other is that when you use the water, you heat the water. And so it's some of it is really the heating of the water. And when you use more water, you're heating more water. So it's not just the use of the water. And then it's when the water's done, the water goes someplace and then we clean the water, and that takes energy to clean the water. So amount of water is really one of these circuitous things that there's connected to lots of different actions. And that's true for a lot of the behaviors that you do. So water use is really one big one. On campus, there's also a lot of things like availability for alternative means of transportation. So you see all the little bikes around campus. That we actually use more of the bikes on campus, more miles than bicycles in New York City, which is, I think, yeah. So we are really a campus that is using these bicycles. That's really helpful, and that's really an important thing to be doing. So go out and use them.
And there are also great trails around town. I'm a cyclist, and so you can get a lot of places on the bike. I have an interesting water story, at least I find interesting. So this is a long time ago, 1980s. I spent my junior year in Germany. I'm a German professor, and I went to take a shower. I was living in the dorms, and after about 3 minutes, the water just went out. I said, "What's going on?" This is 1980s now. In Germany, all the showers and dorms are on 3-minute timers. 3 minutes, you're done. and that was kind of, they're very German about it. It was like, no, you're done. Out.
Good.
So yeah, and you learn to
I
take
was
a
gonna
really
want-
quick shower.
I just want to mention one more thing. Nick gave you a whole bunch of organizations. If you go to the College of Liberal Arts Sustainability website, we have an involvement page, and you can search on any one of the sustainable development goals, and it will click up organizations you can do. So one of the most important things you can do is work with other people to do something. So.
Okay. Hi, thank you so much, Nick. This was really fun, a really fun talk. So I teach an LA 83 class right now. And so one of the things that I'm asking my students to think about is how they can start like healthy habits, sustainable choices as college students in the dorms that they can take to them into the community. One of the things that you mentioned at the end of your talk was about getting out into the community. And as Penn Staters, we're also very heavily influential upon the state college community. So I'm wondering if you might have any suggestions for how we could reduce like our global impact or footprint, such as like buying more sustainably or locally or things like that.
Well, there's a great group on campus that is creating their own garden, and there's produce is available for sale. I think you can do it as a CSA, but that's a bunch of people who went and built their own fields, planted their own vegetables, and they harvest them on a regular basis. And so you think about where your apple came from, or where your squash came from, or whatever. It might have come from right down the road, because we're this university especially is trying to make local purchases in terms of food. And also as individuals, you can get involved with creating your own food, growing your own food, and as even living in the dorms, you can be part of that group. So this one kind of example. I think their use of transportation as well. Mass transportation is a better way than individual transportation in general. Oh, yeah. Community shared agriculture. And so basically it's a farm. You pay a dues for the farm and they give you a box of vegetables every week. It's kind of how it works. But the organization on campus has the same thing. And so something to look into. Yeah.
I don't know if I heard this wrong, but you said that we're not able to like recycle cardboard at the moment.
So
like, is there any future plans like that Penn State's going to do to like make recycling more accessible? Maybe.
I don't know that there is, but you have a great group of people right here who can make it happen. I will say that they do recycle cardboard in box form. The OPP has some cardboard recycling around campus, but it's not with the regular recycling, in the hub or whatever. And so you have to make an effortful attempt to get there to put it in the dumpster. We could make it a lot easier for people and explain what the point is, right? And again, sort of providing visualization about how much waste we're creating and an easy way to solve that problem. And so I'll put it out. Maybe we can have some people here. Yeah. Well, I don't know. I know there's been a study of the composting and recycling that's been carried out to try to make it more efficient. And they've changed some of the rules recently, just a few days ago, about what you can compost and what you can recycle. I think it's a cost-effective thing, and it's also a use thing. So how much cardboard, they might not be aware of those little doodads that are actually made of cardboard. So that's the kind of thing that maybe should be brought forth to somebody in a position of power.
The free ride problem about just like saying like if I'm doing it, it won't matter that much. Is there a psychology term that like relates to that like negative distance?
So, well, in terms of the cognitive dissonance experience, so providing a justification, there's all sorts of ways that cognitive dissonance occurs in circumstances, but it's just all the same basic process where as long as I can find a justification, I can protect myself. And so therefore I'm free, my self-esteem is fine. And so that breaking that barrier down and saying, well, you know what, you can't really justify it that way. That's something that then causes change in behavior. And that's what we're really kind of looking for. I think, does that answer your question? Okay.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. If anyone has a question you want to ask. And just a reminder, there are those organizers, recycling organizers around campus. So, look at them. So like, I think mixed office paper, this type of paper, I can recycle this, for example. So there's a lot of stuff you can recycle. Any other? Well, please join me in giving Dr. Pearson another round of applause.
Thank you.
Thank you all for coming, and I hope you have a great day. You guys are doing great.
Woo.
A lot.